In the frozen heart of a Montana winter in 1867, where the wind could cut through a man like a sharp knife and the snow could bury secrets forever, Eli Sutton found a woman half frozen in the drifts, and in saving her, he unknowingly saved a piece of his own lonely soul. The Montana Territory was still wild and unforgiving that year. Vast empty plains stretched for miles, broken only by rocky hills, scattered pine trees, and the occasional lonely cabin. Eli lived on his small 40-acre homestead, far from any town. His home was a rough one-room log cabin he had built himself, with help from no one. The walls were made of uneven logs chinked with mud and moss. The roof leaked a little when the snow melted, and the single small window was covered with oiled paper instead of real glass. Inside there was a stone fireplace, a narrow bed, a handmade wooden table with 2 stools, and a few shelves holding his simple belongings. Eli was 38 years old, tall and lean from years of hard work. His hands were rough and calloused, his face tanned by sun and wind, and his dark hair had a few strands of early gray. He owned one old mare named Bess, 4 skinny chickens that barely laid eggs in winter, and a small pile of firewood he guarded carefully. His food stores were low: some dried beans, a sack of cornmeal, a little salt pork, and whatever he could hunt or trap. He never complained. Poverty was not something to be ashamed of. It was just the life he knew. He worked from sunrise to sunset, chopping wood, fixing fences, tending his small garden plot that was now buried under snow, and talking quietly to Bess in the tiny barn as if she understood every word. That January night the blizzard came roaring in like an angry beast. The wind howled so loudly it drowned out every other sound. Snow fell in thick, blinding sheets, piling up against the cabin walls until the drifts reached halfway up the door. Eli sat close to the fire, wrapped in his only heavy coat, feeding small sticks into the flames to keep 'em alive. The cold crept in through every crack. His breath turned to white mist in the air. Suddenly he heard a faint thump outside, like something heavy hitting the side of the cabin. At first he thought a tree branch had broken, but then it came again, weaker this time. Eli frowned, pulled on his old boots and thick wool scarf, and grabbed the lantern. He had to push hard against the door to open it. The wind nearly knocked him down. Snow stung his face like tiny needles.
He stepped out into the white chaos, holding the lantern high. The light barely cut through the storm. Just 10 feet from the door he saw a dark shape half buried in a fresh drift. It was a person, a woman, her body curled up, her long coat torn and covered in ice. Her hair was frozen stiff against her pale face, and her lips were a frightening shade of blue. She was not moving. Eli's heart jumped. Without wasting a second, he dropped to his knees, brushed the snow off her, and lifted her into his arms. She felt as light as a child. He carried her inside, kicking the door shut behind him with his boot. Snow fell from her clothes onto the dirt floor and began to melt in small puddles. He laid her gently on his bed, the only real bed he owned. Quickly he piled every blanket he had over her, including the thin one he used himself. He took off her wet boots and coat, hanging them near the fire to dry. Her stockings were soaked, so he carefully pulled them off and wrapped her cold feet in his spare pair of wool socks. Then he heated water in his iron pot and made a thin broth from the last of his dried meat and some cornmeal. Spoon by spoon he fed her a little, though she was still unconscious. For the next 3 days and nights Eli barely slept. He sat on the hard dirt floor beside the bed, feeding the fire constantly, melting snow for water, and checking on her every hour. He gave her the bigger share of whatever little food he had. At night, he lay on the floor near the fireplace, using his coat as a blanket, his body aching from the cold. But he never once thought of leaving her to fend for herself. That was not the kind of man he was. On the fourth morning, as pale sunlight finally broke through the storm clouds, the woman stirred. Her eyes, deep brown and full of confusion, opened slowly. She looked around the tiny cabin, then at the man sitting quietly by the fire. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice weak and raspy. "You're in my cabin," Eli said softly, his voice calm and steady like the land itself. "Name's Eli Sutton. You were out in a blizzard. I found you near the door. You're safe now, miss." She tried to sit up, but was too weak. "Thank you," she murmured. "My name's Clara." That was all she said at first. No last name, no explanation of where she had come from or why she had been riding alone through such deadly weather. Eli did not press her. He figured everyone carried their own burdens, and some were too heavy to share right away. As the days passed, the blizzard continued to rage outside, trapping them together. Clara grew a little stronger each day. Eli gave up his bed completely, sleeping on the floor every night without complaint. He killed one of his precious chickens to make a nourishing soup for her. He melted snow so she could wash her face and hands with warm water. He even mended a small tear in her coat with coarse thread while she rested. Clara watched him with quiet eyes. At first she felt afraid and out of place in this simple, poor home, but slowly something changed. She began to help where she could. She swept the dirt floor with the old broom, fed the chickens small handfuls of corn, and used her small, careful stitches to mend Eli's torn shirt and socks. She was not used to such hard, simple work, but she did it without grumbling. They did not speak of grand things. Their conversations were small and gentle. "The wind sounds like it's singing tonight," Clara said one evening as they sat by the fire. Eli nodded. "Sometimes it does. Other times it just screams. Depends on its mood." They laughed softly together, the first real laugh in that cabin in a long time. One clear evening after the worst of the storm had passed, Eli came back from checking on Bess in the barn. His cheeks were red from the cold. In his hand was something small and brown. He placed it on the rough wooden table without saying much. It was a pine cone, perfectly shaped, almost like a tiny heart. Clara picked it up carefully. She turned it over and over in her fingers, feeling its rough texture. Her eyes grew misty, but she blinked the tears away. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Thank you, Eli." He only shrugged a little, but his eyes were warm. "Thought you might like it." That small pine cone became a quiet symbol between them. Clara kept it on the window sill. Every time she looked at it, she felt a gentle pull in her chest. As the weeks went by, their days fell into a peaceful rhythm. Eli would chop wood outside, his axe ringing in the cold air, while Clara prepared simple meals inside, cornmeal mush, bean soup, or fried salt pork when they had it. In the evenings, they sat side by side on the narrow bench, close but never quite touching. They listened to the fire crackle and the wind whisper outside. Sometimes Eli would tell a short story about his life, how he'd come west years ago looking for a fresh start after losing his family to illness back east.
Clara listened without interrupting, her heart aching for the quiet pain in his words. Clara had her own secret, as heavy as the snow outside. She was not a simple traveler. Her full name was Clara Whittemore, and she owned more than 80,000 acres of rich land across the territory. She was a powerful landowner and businesswoman who made important decisions that affected many lives. She had been riding to inspect one of her distant ranches when the blizzard struck and her horse had thrown her. She had wandered lost until she collapsed near Eli's cabin. She wanted to tell him the truth many times, but every time she looked at his honest, hard-working face and saw the simple kindness in his eyes, the words stuck in her throat. What if he treated her differently? What if this warm, growing feeling between them vanished the moment he knew she came from a world of big houses, servants, and money? So she stayed silent, pretending to be just Clara, a woman grateful for shelter. Eli sensed she was hiding something. He noticed the refined way she sometimes spoke or the delicate way she held things, but he never asked. He believed that real trust grew slowly, like the first green shoots after winter. Pushing too hard could break the fragile thing taking root in their hearts. Their love did not explode like fireworks. It grew quietly, like a small flame that refuses to die in the wind. It lived in the way Eli always saved the larger piece of bread for Clara's plate. It lived in the way Clara's face lit up when Eli returned from the cold with fresh firewood, stamping snow from his boots. It lived in long silences where they simply sat together, feeling safe and understood for the first time in years. No grand declarations, no dramatic kisses in the snow, just small everyday moments filled with deep care. One night, as they shared the last of the bean soup, Clara said softly, "You give so much, Eli, even when you have so little." He looked into the fire. "Giving what you can, that's not much. It's just right." Spring arrived slowly, melting the deep snow into muddy streams. The trails became passable again. Birds returned, and the grass began to turn green on the hills. Clara knew she could not stay hidden forever. Her real world, her responsibilities, her land, her people waited for her. One bright morning, she stood at the cabin door, her coat cleaned and mended as best as she could. Her heart felt heavy. "I have to go back now," she said, her voice trembling just a little. "There are things I must face." Eli stood there, strong and steady as always. Inside, something twisted painfully in his chest, but he did not show it. He knew that true love did not mean holding someone against their will. It meant letting them go if they needed to. He walked to the small barn and let out Bess, his faithful old mare. He had brushed her coat until it shone and placed the best blanket he owned on her back. "Take her," he said quietly, handing Clara the reins. "She's slow but sure-footed. She'll get you safely wherever you need to go." Clara's eyes filled with tears. She touched the horse's neck, then looked at Eli. "I don't know how to thank you for everything. You saved my life and more." "You don't need to thank me," Eli replied, his voice low. "You brought a little warmth to this cold place. That's enough." She mounted the horse, took one long last look at the small cabin, at the man standing alone with empty hands and a full heart, and then turned Bess toward the distant trail. As she rode away, tears streamed down her face, but she did not look back again. The wind carried the sound of hooves until it faded into silence. Eli stood watching until she was gone over the hill. Then he went back inside, sat on the floor by the now quiet fireplace, and let the tears come. For the first time in many years, the strong, quiet man allowed himself to feel the full weight of loneliness. The following months were hard. Eli worked his land alone under the summer sun. He repaired fences, planted a small crop, and cared for the remaining chickens. Every morning he touched the small pine cone on the windowsill. It had become his quiet reminder of those cold winter days filled with unexpected warmth. One afternoon in early fall, Eli rode a borrowed mule into the nearest settlement to buy supplies. While waiting in the general store, his eyes fell on an old newspaper lying on the counter. The front page had a drawing of a woman. The headline read, "Clara Whitmore, owner of the largest ranch holdings in Montana Territory, safely returns after surviving deadly winter blizzard."
Eli stared at the image for a long time. It was her, the same gentle eyes, the same soft curve of her mouth. His Clara was one of the richest and most powerful people in the entire territory. She had servants, grand houses, and land that stretched farther than a man could ride in a week. He bit his nails and rode home slowly, the news heavy in his mind. It hurt, yes, but strangely it did not make the memories feel cheap or false. The shared meals, the quiet evenings, the pine cone, all of it still felt real and precious. The money and land did not erase the woman who had laughed softly at his simple stories, or who had carefully mended his old shirt. As the leaves began to turn gold and the air grew crisp again, Eli was splitting firewood behind the cabin one afternoon, his axe rising and falling with steady rhythm. Sweat ran down his back despite the cool breeze. Suddenly he heard the sound of approaching hooves. He looked up, shielding his eyes from the sun. A rider was coming toward the cabin on a fine horse. The woman dismounted a short distance away. She wore a simple traveling dress, nothing fancy. Her hair was loose and wind-tossed, just as he remembered. It was Clara. She walked slowly toward him, her hands twisting together nervously. When she was close enough, she stopped and looked into his eyes. "Eli," she began, her voice soft but clear, "I should have told you the truth from the beginning. I was scared. I thought if you knew I was Clara Whitmore, the woman with all that land and money, you would see me differently, that what we shared in the cabin would disappear like snow in spring." Eli set the axe down against the chopping block. He wiped his hands on his trousers and studied her face for a long moment. Then he spoke in his calm, honest way. "That doesn't change a thing." Clara's breath caught in her throat. Fresh tears welled up. "But you don't understand. I own 80,000 acres. I have big houses, workers who answer to me, bank accounts full of money. My life is nothing like this simple cabin." Eli took one step closer. His eyes were steady and kind. "I saw the newspaper. I know who you are in that big world. But the woman who slept in my bed when she was freezing, who ate my poor soup without complaint, who smiled when I gave her a silly pine cone, that woman is standing right here. The rest, that's just extra layers. It doesn't touch what matters." Clara let out a shaky laugh mixed with a sob. "I left it all behind this time. The big house, the meetings, the power. I told him I wasn't coming back the same way. I came here with almost nothing, just a few clothes and my own 2 hands. If you'll have me, I want to stay here, with you." For the first time in many months, a real, gentle smile
touched Eli's lips. It reached his eyes and made them shine. He did not rush forward with grand words. He simply opened his arms. "I never stopped having you," he said quietly. Clara stepped into his embrace. They held each other tightly for the first time, not out of cold or fear of dying, but out of choice and deep, quiet joy. The wind rustled through the tall grass around the cabin. The old logs creaked softly, as if welcoming her home. That evening they sat together on the familiar bench inside the cabin. Clara had brought almost nothing with her, but she did not mind. Eli made a simple pot of soup from beans, cornmeal, and a little wild onion he had found. They ate slowly, sharing the same spoon when one needed wiping, talking in low voices about small things and big feelings. On the windowsill, the small pine cone still rested, its heart shaped unchanged by time or weather. It had survived dust, heat, and cold. Now it watched over 'em like a silent promise. In the years that followed, the little 40-acre homestead grew. Eli and Clara built a larger, warmer house beside the old cabin, but they never tore the original one down. It stayed as it was, a reminder of the winter that brought them together. Travelers who passed by sometimes heard the story of the poor homesteader and the rich woman who chose love over luxury. And folks in the territory would say with a knowing smile, "Once something gets truly warm in the right way, deep in the heart, it never gets cold again." The little pine cone on the windowsill proved it every single day. Thank you for riding along with it. See you in the next tale. Drop your location and time one more time if you'd like, and if it touched you, like, send some stars, follow, and share it with someone who needs to hear it.